By the late 19th century, Minnesota wasn't just a state, it was a logging powerhouse, a lush landscape teeming with timber. The demand for lumber had skyrocketed as the nation rushed to build homes and cities. Settlers flocked to the northern reaches, lured by the promise of prosperity and the vast, untouched forests. Minnesota's timber economy was surging, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, one that would unleash devastation on an unimaginable scale. The summer of 1894 was scorching, a dry season where rain was little more than a distant memory. The state baked under the relentless sun, the parched earth sucking moisture from the air. Farmers tended to their crops, but fields and forests alike began to wilt. Environmental conditions spiraled into a perfect storm. High winds whipped through the trees, while humidity plummeted. The landscape transformed into a veritable tinderbox ripe for ignition, but human greed only exacerbated the situation. Logging companies, driven by the determination to extract every last tree, pushed deeper into the forests. Sustainable practices took a back seat as enormous trees fell, their stumps left behind to rot amidst the timber. Land developers, eager to turn lush timberland into burgeoning towns, stripped the land bare. The closer they came to civilization, the more vulnerable the natural landscape became, a delicate ecosystem tilted precariously on the brink of disaster. What happened next was a grim reminder of the cost of unchecked ambition. On October 12, 1894, the wind kicked up with a ferocity unseen before. Reports indicated gusts reaching up to 50 miles per hour. Dry leaves ignited, and flames leaped from tree to tree as chaos erupted. The fire had begun in a logging camp near the town of Hinckley, but it was quickly beyond control, racing toward the neighboring communities. In less than a day, towns that had thrived through the timber trade found themselves engulfed in flames. One moment, life flowed through the streets. Children played, merchants opened shops, families gathered for meals. The next, a hellish inferno chilled the heart of each resident. Panic ensued as people realized the severity of their plight. They fled with little more than the clothes on their backs, their homes becoming distant memories as the flames consumed everything in their path. Across the region, smoke billowed high into the sky, blotting out the sun and casting a dark pall over the landscape. A haze of ash settled on the towns. In the aftermath, the skeletons of buildings stood like solemn sentinels amidst a ghostly expanse. The greed-driven negligence became painfully apparent, leaving communities grappling with the consequences of their actions. Survivors found themselves in a battle against more than just physical flames. They wrestled with a deep-seated anguish. How could this happen? Was a question echoing in their minds as they tried to comprehend the loss. Yet, amid the destruction and despair, stories began surfacing. Who had really been responsible for the disaster? Would their hunger for profit come back to haunt them in ways they could never have imagined? The devastation was just the beginning. The truth of that day would unfold in ways that would change Minnesota forever. What lies ahead for the survivors? And could any lessons be learned from their past? Tune in next time to discover the aftermath of the Great Minnesota Fire of 1894, where the hunger for restoration met the bitter taste of regret. The day began like any other in October 1894, but within mere hours, it would evolve into an inferno of chaos and despair. On the evening of October 12th, a small fire ignited in the parched oak and pine forests of Wisconsin, just a few miles from the Minnesota border. The dry summer had left the ground barren, and the air hung thick with impending doom. No one could have predicted the spark would lead to a conflagration that would engulf entire towns. The flames spread rapidly, fueled by decades of unchecked logging practices that left the forest floor littered with dry debris and felled trees. This was a region accustomed to seasonal wildfires, but the combination of relentless drought and gusty winds turned an ordinary fire into a beast of unimaginable destruction. Witness reports describe a sudden shift in the wind, catching townsfolk completely off guard. By midday, the flames roared toward Hinckley. Panic set in as residents spotted the advancing smoke on the horizon. The sun, obscured by a thick cloud of ash, cast an eerie gloom over the town. Families scrambled to gather what possessions they could and flee, while others stood frozen, their minds racing. How could this happen? Leveraging their hustle, The townspeople attempted to prepare makeshift barriers, scooping dirt to halt the inferno's advance. But the fire paid no heed to their efforts. Survivors recounted harrowing moments as the fire encroached. One witness described how the air sparkled with embers, igniting a frenzy of fear. People dropped everything: clothes, heirlooms, even their pets, all abandoned to escape the encroaching blaze. An anonymous individual later recalled the deafening roar of the flames, a sound that drowned out the cries of the desperate. When the firestorm finally surged into Hinckley, it transformed from a distant threat into an unstoppable force. The factors compounding the fire's intensity were staggering. The drought did not merely dehydrate the land, it allowed kindling to flourish. The aggressive logging practices had stripped the forests of their natural resilience, replacing lush greenery with a crumbling landscape of sawdust and splintered trees. Cedar bark, a natural insulator, lay scattered beneath the canopy, more fuel for the flames. Strong winds, those fickle harbingers of destruction, whipped through the woods, sweeping embers and igniting further blazes that would leapfrog their way into nearby towns. As the fire devoured the landscape, it spread beyond Hinckley to nearby towns, each engulfed in its own battle against nature's fury. Small villages like Sandstone and Grantsburg found themselves trapped. Some locals remembered a sense of betrayal as they watched what was once their beloved home succumb to the flames. Where was the accountability for such devastation? And how long would their recovery take? These questions haunted survivors. Yet lurking beneath the surface was an unsettling tension. The logging companies, who had profited immensely from exploiting the land, bore silent culpability in this environmental tragedy. Public outcry began to stir. Who would be held responsible for blocking off natural disaster warning systems? Could greed have truly sacrificed the lives of so many? As the dust settled and the fires finally dimmed, the ashes told a haunting tale. But deeper mysteries loomed. Would this tragedy prompt real change in the logging industry, or merely become another footnote in Minnesota's fiery history? What about the whispers of negligence echoing in the halls of power? The answers lie just ahead. The flames extinguished, but the devastation had only begun to unfold. Hinckley, once a bustling town of 1,000, lay in ruins, reduced to smoldering heaps of debris. The inferno claimed 139 lives, leaving families shattered in its wake. Buildings that had housed hopes and dreams were now ash, swallowed by the ruthless fire that swept through the heart of Minnesota. The immediate aftermath revealed a ghostly landscape, a stark reminder of human negligence. With timber resources obliterated, economic consequences became evident. For years, logging companies had stripped the land without regard for ecological balance. Forests, previously teeming with life, transformed into barren expanses. Habitats that once supported diverse wildlife vanished overnight, leaving local ecosystems in disarray. However, the tragedy sparked a fierce spirit of resilience among survivors. Communities united, forming recovery efforts to rebuild what was lost. Neighbors who once were strangers bonded over shared grief. They sifted through the ashes, salvaging what little remained of their lives. Yet, a simmering discontent brewed beneath the surface. Many questioned why land management practices had gone unchecked for so long. Why had regulations failed to protect them from such a catastrophe? While they worked tirelessly to rebuild their towns, a dark cloud loomed over the logging industry. Accusations flew like the embers carried by the wind. Were the companies responsible for the disaster? Had greed blinded them to the dangers of their actions? As anger flared, inquiries into the industry's practices gained momentum. Minnesota's government faced pressure to respond. Would they hold logging companies accountable? Would they impose stricter regulations for the future? The fire had ignited not just a physical blaze, but a movement, a call for justice and change that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, the environmental impact lingered on. The absence of trees led to soil erosion, while the once rich woodlands struggled to recover. Farmers and loggers alike faced dwindling resources. The livelihoods of many hung in the balance as farmers watched their crops wilt under the unforgiving sun. Without the lush forests to moderate the climate, droughts became more severe. What had once been a thriving area now faced uncertainty. People across the region began to question the very fabric of their beliefs about progress and industry. Were the benefits of aggressiveness in logging worth the peril they faced? Did their pursuit of profit outweigh the sanctity of their homeland? The fire had not only ignited physical destruction, but it also illuminated the fraught relationship between industry and the environment. As accusations flew and communities mounted their efforts to rebuild, one crucial question remained unanswered. Could the lessons learned from this devastation prevent future disasters, or was the cycle of greed and negligence destined to repeat itself? The ground, still smoldering in places, would yield the answer. Only time would tell how Minnesota would rise from the ashes, and whether accountability would take root in the wake of such loss. Would the logging industry change its ways, or would it take another catastrophe to compel action? In the aftermath of the Great Minnesota Fire, the landscape lay charred and hollow. But beyond the physical ruins, an insidious truth emerged. The timber companies had prioritized profit over safety practices. This negligence was not a mere oversight. It was a fundamental flaw in corporate ethics. As forests burned and towns crumbled, whispers of greed echoed among survivors. How had business interests overshadowed the well-being of entire communities? Logs had been stripped from the forests with reckless abandon, often with little regard for fire safety. Clear-cutting left behind a barren wasteland, stripped of its natural defenses. The cumulative effect of such practices? An environment ripe for catastrophe. While natural factors like dry conditions and strong winds contributed to the inferno, the timber industry's relentless harvesting created a tinderbox of dead branches and unprocessed debris. In the wake of devastation, Minnesotans demanded accountability. Voices rose from the ashes of Hinckley, uniting survivors and citizens alike. They made it clear the old ways could no longer suffice. Legislators listened. Change was on the horizon. In the aftermath of the fire, Minnesota enacted rigorous laws designed to regulate logging practices. Companies found themselves under scrutiny, forced to adopt fire safety protocols that had previously been mere suggestions. Stricter rules on land management emerged, aimed at restoring balance between industry ambitions and ecological reality. By the end of the decade, new forest management strategies were in place. These included promoting controlled burns, an ancient practice rooted in wisdom, as well as planting more resilient species of trees. The goal was not only to replenish what had been lost, but also to create a forest composition better suited to withstand wildfires. However, this regulatory shift led to an ongoing debate. Could economic growth coexist with environmental stewardship? As timber companies adjusted to these new laws, some argued that they stifled innovation and profit, while others insisted they were essential for long-term sustainability. The tension between these opposing views was palpable, forming a complex tapestry of interests that intertwined with the lives of Minnesotans. The scars of the fire served as a brutal reminder of nature's power and the responsibilities of mankind. How could a society driven by ambition and competition ensure that nature wasn't depleted in the pursuit of progress? As new policies rolled out, a delicate balance needed to be negotiated, protecting the environment while still allowing for economic investment. Speculation lingered. Would the new regulations prove sufficient, or would profit-driven motives resurface, challenging the fragile improvements that had been made? As Minnesotans grappled with their identity in a post-fire world, the question remained, would the lessons learned from the ashes be enough to prevent future tragedies? What changes were brewing on the horizon that could redefine the relationship between industry and nature yet again? As communities rebuilt, their resolve to hold those in power accountable only grew stronger. A new chapter was about to unfold, one that could either restore hope or lead to another devastating inferno. Would the cycle of disaster repeat, or had the memory of 1894 finally ignited a lasting change?